This is Super GC Plus. It's a drop-in replacement for Super Nintendo and Super Famicom controllers to make them function as a GameCube controller. It works with both the GameCube and the Wii, and is a great fit for Gameboy Player, Virtual Console, emulators, and more. You can also easily configure and remap it using homebrew software, and make further hardware modifications if desired. We designed it as an easy first project for those wanting to learn how to mod or solder. And today, I'm going to show you how to install one yourself. To perform this mod, you're going to need the following: a Super GC Plus kit, a Super Nintendo or Super Famicom controller, it doesn't have to be functional, a small Phillips screwdriver, a temperature-controlled soldering iron, solder wick, and some flush cutters. The first step is to unscrew the 5 screws on the back of the Super Nintendo controller. Remove the motherboard and set the rest off to the side, including the screws. This controller reuses the shoulder PCBs, so we'll need to desolder those. Use the side of the tip of the iron to apply heat until the solder melts. Then gently pull the wire from the other side. Repeat for all 4 wires. Make sure you desolder the wires from the main PCB and not the shoulder PCBs. Next, we're going to solder the GC Plus module onto the Super GC Plus carrier board. Start by aligning the GC Plus module onto the center of the pad on the back. Use your iron to apply heat to the pad for a few seconds. The goal is to make the pad reach the melting temperature of the solder, so the solder melts right onto it. Touch the solder between the iron and the pad, and the solder should flow onto the pad. Pull the iron away, and you should have a nice smooth joint. By only tacking down one pad, you can remelt the joint to realign the module to make sure it's square before soldering the other joints. Once the board is straight and you are satisfied with its position, tack down a pin on the opposite corner. Then proceed to solder the remaining pads one by one. Do a final inspection to make sure none of the pins are shorted together, or you can double check with a multimeter. You can use isopropyl alcohol to clean up the flux residue to make the board look nice, but that's optional. If any of the pins short together, you can fix the joints by using solder braid, also known as solder wick. Set the solder wick on top of the solder you want to remove, then place your iron on top of the braid, applying a little bit of pressure to ensure proper contact. The solder should then be sucked into the braid. Once an adequate amount of solder is removed, you can use fresh solder to try again. Next, we're going to solder the shoulder PCBs. Ensure the boards are in the proper orientation, and then insert the wires into these holes. Then, use the same technique as before. Touch your iron to both the wire and the pad until the solder melts right onto them. Repeat this for all 4 wires. Next, we're going to apply the rumble motor. Start by peeling the adhesive paper and sticking the motor onto this circle. Centered is better, but don't fret if it's slightly off-center. Place the red wire into the M+ hole and the black wire into the M- hole. Solder them both into place, then flatten the wires around top like this. Next, if your cable has a metal crimp towards the end, use flush cutters to pry it off. Now, take the 5 wires from the cable and solder them to the header at the bottom. Make sure you insert them into the holes on the back and then solder onto the pads on the front. Use the same technique and solder them in the order shown here. If the colors change in the future, we'll have updated diagrams on 4layertech.com. Now we will begin reassembly. Take the newly assembled board and insert it into the front half of the controller. Make sure not to forget the buttons and their squishy pads. Then, take your controller cable and route it around these posts as shown. This adds some level of strain relief, but we're going to add even more using the included zip tie here. Once you are sure the shoulder buttons, posts, and pads are all in place, close the controller and screw it back together. Plug it in and test it. If everything works, congratulations, you're finished. Now you can use RV Loader or the GC Plus configuration software to customize your settings to your liking. If you're having trouble or need additional help troubleshooting, check out the 4Layer Tech Discord, linked below.